So that's why, when I talk about emotional support and emotional health, that's really sort of including the mental health as well. In the mental piece here, what I'm talking about more is decision making, that, making sure that we focus on what we do have to offer and that it can work in different places. And so I have a few different examples here, and then I'll ask you all for some examples as well. So, for instance, are there things you can create that are helpful? Graphic design, building, making spreadsheets, writing, public speaking, data analysis, data science. There's just like endless amounts of things where you can create products that people will use. And I think we often kind of forget all the things we've created over time. So, going through and making a list of the things you've created or things that you're able to create, I think can be super helpful. Next, and I'll check back in with the chat too, analysis. Like, are there things you're able to analyze well, whether it's human dynamics, whether it's statistics? There's so many jobs, especially in like the federal government, that just say analyst, which is very general. But it is true that like so much of what we do is kind of breaking down information in the way we're doing things. You see, I like this photo because this woman's coming up with a bunch of different things on Post-its. I often lead sessions that are called human-centered design, where it's around the idea that we come up with ideas to tackle a problem and keep it very broad, and then kind of group them in categories and then test out how they might work, and then come up with a bunch more ideas and test them out. Often our view can be sort of narrowed when we're stressed or fearful. And so working together to think of all the different types of analysis you can do is great. Communication. Do you have some skills in communication? The answer to that is yes. Everywhere that you've worked requires some degree of communication. It doesn't just have to be in communications, plural, or public affairs. It's important to realize that that's an essential, skill, and that some people have that skill more pronounced than others. And so, whether it's in an interview or a cover letter or writing, making sure that, you bring across the ways that you can communicate. And I think practicing with people is helpful too. When you have a support group, you can practice for what you want to communicate to people. Again, that's community. Do you have some management experience? There's, people are often looking for people with management experience when they're hiring, and it doesn't only have to be in paid jobs. Are there situations where you volunteered and managed a group of volunteers, or you led a project that you managed, or you did something at your house of worship, or, there's ways that you can sort of spin that on your resume or in cover letters or in interviews to show the complexity of the management you've done. Planning, right? Like so much of work now is about planning. I get hired to do these strategic planning retreats and workshops. And even though people often don't stick to their plans, everyone wants to make plans and follow through with them. And certainly, in the consulting world, things like agile planning, if you've heard of agile project management, is highly valued. Anything where you're sort of forward-looking and planning out a schedule. Have you ever used a Gantt chart before? I didn't know what that was when I first got a consulting job. And then suddenly that was everything that I was doing, which was really just making a visual plan for what we were going to work on over, the next few months. And certainly urban planning too, I got to do some of that in a previous job, which I hadn't thought of, but it was really interesting to think about, the ways that the city was evolving, that they were kind of charting out things. And, one of my favorite books in terms of job searching, if you haven't already heard of it, is called Designing Your Life. It's out of the Stanford Design School. And the argument that these two authors make, or professors there, is that you should figure out ways to try things out. And that doesn't mean an unpaid internship if you can't afford that. think of little ways that you can try to practice something. If you're considering a new field, could you volunteer for a few days? Could you shadow someone? Could you interview someone about what it would be like? Because I think often we want to make a wholesale change and it might not necessarily be the right option. So any ways that you can kind of test things out and try them out is important. And then implementation. Is there a story that you can tell where you took something at a previous job that was a new idea and you implemented it effectively, and communicating that to an employer, whether it's, in your cover letter, in an interview, so much of work now are these kind of longer term projects. And if you can show that you've implemented something well, and that it made a difference for people, and, in a quantitative way, I think it's often good to show kind of quantitative results. That's helpful. I see some really great quotes from Ron in here about imposter syndrome. Thank you for including that, Ron. That goes to that whole piece around the inner critic too, right? Like, we are so much more capable than we probably usually realize. And other people know that too, right? You might talk to friends and they're like, you're great at this, you're great at that, but it's hard for us to remember that. So that's something you can do too, is, ask some friends or family, whoever's close to you, like, what are the things that I'm great at? What am I missing? What am I not highlighting here?